Hello class, this is Professor Quigley and I am super excited and super proud of you for making it this far in Zybooks. However, I do know that you're stuck on Challenge Activity 2.12 and I am here to help. I do want to apologize, however, because I am sick. My voice is starting to go. In fact, it's going to crack several times throughout this video. Even though I know there's going to be many of you that will laugh at me, um, I do want you to think for a second. Even though I'm sick, I'm still willing to help you. So laugh at me all you want, but you are going to pass this class and you are going to succeed. All right, class. Well, here we have 2.12 variables assignments, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take a value and divide it by x. On the screen over here, I want to show you this pseudocode. If you remember in week 1, we spent a lot of time in the discussions talking about what pseudocode was. So over here, zoom in so you can see this. If you hit week 2, you scroll down the page right past all these helpful videos I want you guys to watch before reaching out to me because they do a better job than me typing to you over an email. But when you reach a problem and you want the pseudocode for that, see my voice cracked, go ahead and laugh. When you want this pseudocode that tells you exactly how you need to format your code, you're going to find that over here. So every week in the course, you're going to find the new document that says pseudocode week, whatever week it is. If you click that, it's going to open up here. Now, let's get back into Zybooks and let's get this problem started. So I hit start, and if I'm looking at the pseudocode, it says declare a variable user num as an integer. So I'm going to do just exactly that. I'm going to say integer user num, and then I'm going to say what it says up here on line 2. Let's see. Declare a variable x. So I'm going to say integer x. Now if I look on the pseudocode, it tells me right here assign a value to user num using the get next statement. So I always break these statements down by saying whatever it is I'm assigning, I will say user num, and then I'm going to say equals. What does it equal? It's going to equal whatever it is we get from the get next statement. So that is get next, let's see, what is that? I believe it is get next input. Okay, so now, if you remember that video I sent out at the beginning of the week, I explained what get next input was. Get next input basically means that you want this value to hold whatever it is that the user using your application gives you, because you want your application to be dynamic. You don't want it to always be 2000. You don't want to say username equals 2000 because no one's going to use your application. They want to be able to put their values in, and you want your application to be smart enough to handle whatever it throws at them. So I digress. So now I'm going to say x also equals get next input because that's what our next line here said. Now if we go to the next line, it says assign to user num the result that divides in user num by x. Now when you read that, it's a little confusing because there's a lot of things mentioned in that sentence. So do what I told you previously and just break it down. Start off by saying assign to user num. So let's go ahead and write user num. The word assign means it's going to equal something. So user num, what does it equal? It's going to be whatever the result of dividing user num by x is. So we're literally going to write user num divided by x. Now it's telling us over here, put the variable user num to output. So I'm going to put user num to output. Then it's going to tell me put a single space to output. Put to output. Now, everything we're doing so far reading from pseudocode here is what a software developer would do. Software developer is one who gets handed pseudocode and they convert it into actual code. So I'll continue making videos throughout the course in which I show you how we can take pseudocode and actually convert it in Visual Studio using a language like C# or Python. I'll show you all that advanced stuff. However, just know that in Zybooks, that's what you're practicing. You're practicing what a software developer does is I'm going to take this pseudocode and I'm going to convert it into Zybooks uses its own pseudocode, but you could practice and just humor me for a bit. Here's pseudocode. I have to kind of understand what this is telling me to do, and then I have to write it out a little differently over here. Now, A software engineer is on a higher level than a software developer. A software engineer gets paid to think. So a software developer had all this pseudocode, the problem solved, and everything written out for them. Software engineer doesn't have pseudocode because when they sit with a customer, a software engineer is going to listen to a customer saying, "Hey, here's my problem. I need an application that does X, Y, and Z, and I want it to do all this." You're going to get paid as a software engineer to figure out what that pseudocode is. You're going to have to flowchart it out in your mind. You're going to have to go through that process where you figure out what are all your inputs, what are the processes, and what is the output that the customer is expecting. That's what a software engineer does. Keep in mind, a software engineer can make $20,000 to $30,000 more per year than a software developer. However, I don't want you to beat yourself up. This is week 2. 2 weeks ago, we weren't even a software developer. We were nothing. Okay. My point is that as we progress throughout this course, I don't want you to become so dependent on the pseudocode, and I don't want you to become so dependent on the helpful videos. I want you to try to approach these problems and try to think, especially for those of you who are actually looking at getting into the field. I want you to start decoupling yourself. Now, whether that happens this week, week 5, or even if it happens after the course, that's okay. This is a learning environment, and we're going to learn this together. But, my voice cracked. Go ahead and laugh. But whenever it says output the variable, I don't have to put that in quotes because the user or the variable, every time I output a variable, it's going to know to output whatever the value of that variable is. Whenever I say put something to output and I put it in quotes, that's when I'm saying, hey, I have a string of value. Whatever I type in, I want it to go to the screen. So if I was wanting to output a space, I don't have a variable for space. So a software engineer would look at the output and reverse engineer it and say, hey, I need to output a variable. Then I'm going to need to output a space bar or just a space character. And then I'm going to output another variable space. So that's what we're going to do in our code. And that's why our pseudocode is telling us to do that. So when we put the variable, we don't put it in quotes because we have a value there and it's going to output that. We put whatever we're going to type in, any fixed value in quotes because the computer needs to know that everything before the quote is instructions you're giving it. Inside the quotes is everything you want it to say on the screen. And then outside the quotes, it goes back to instructions that you're giving the computer. So the quote separates what you're typing to be displayed versus what you're typing for the computer to understand what to do. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, email me and I will explain it to you over email where my voice doesn't crack. Okay. Now it's telling me assign to user num. So let me go ahead and write that. User num equals the result of dividing user num by x. Well, this seems redundant because we just did this. And then I am going to put the variable to output and put a single space to output. So again, it seems like this right here is something that's repeated a couple times. I'm going to go ahead and type it out, but I want you to think for a moment why it is that we're writing the same lines of code over and over and over, but yet we're getting the different output over here. So while I type that, think about it. I'm going to go ahead and type this out again because again, this is the same lines of code here. So I'm going to say user num equals user num divided by x. Put user num to output. Put space to output. And then I have to do it one more time. Scroll down here. Over here it says user num equals same thing again. Again, very redundant. Divided by x. And then put user num to output. Okay, so if you haven't figured it out, I'm going to explain it to you. When we declare user num and we declare x, it has no value. So over here on line 6, what we're saying is user num is going to equal whatever the user types in. So let's just assume the user gave us the value of 100. and then gave us the value of x is 2. So user num right here on line 9, remember sequence, what we talked about week 1, everything happens in order. So as it's going 1 through 9, user num equals 100 because the user just told us that. So this is essentially going to read 100 equals 100 divided by 2. So it's going to take 100, divide it by 2, whatever that answer is, it's 50, and it's going to store it right here. So now user num equals 50. So when we put user num to output, it's going to output to the screen 50. Then it's going to put our space on the screen. Now in line 13, user num still equals 50 because we don't have any lines of code in between up here and down here that changes it. So user num still equals 50. So line 13 is going to be 50 equals 50 divided by 2. X still stays the same because nowhere on here do we change the value of X throughout our program. So now we're going to say 50 divided by 2 is going to equal 25. Then we're going to output 25. So you can kind of see that up here in the instructions when it says if we were given 2002, it would output 1,500. See how it keeps dividing it in half with the same lines of code? That is literally the intention of this whole challenge activity. That's your takeaway message. That's what you need to understand, is that these variables, you're setting them, and then you keep reusing them. You don't have to keep changing them. So like, that's how variable works, and that is really freaking cool. So let's check our code here. Now, here's what I want you to understand. When you get an error message, I don't want you to email me and say, hey, Professor Quigley, I'm getting an error message, Zybooks isn't working. Zybooks is working just fine. You got an error message because there was something wrong in your code. And if you take a deep breath, big inhale, and I promise you, you don't have to have a lot of experience, but if you read the error message very slowly to yourself, you can probably figure it out. So over here, it's telling me on line 22. So I know line 22 has the problem. It's saying there's an unknown word, user num, and it's telling me maybe you meant user num with a lowercase. Then it's telling me capitalization matters. So I'm going to hit try again because remember what I told you when we first started this video several minutes ago? I'm sorry, this video is too long. I like to ramble, but I want to make sure you're learning something. I don't want you just to copy this. I want you to understand every step of these problems and how it relates to the real world. You declared a variable user num. You said in memory, I'm going to store a value here, and every time I'm going to use that value later, I'm going to refer to it by this name. You have it as a lowercase here, so it needs to be a lowercase over here as well. So I'm going to change that to a lowercase, and I'm going to hit check, and I am good. I have a green check mark. However, I want you to also understand this. Many of you will sit there and say user num equals, and rather than doing get next input, you'll say it equals 2000. Then you'll say x equals 2. So what's going to happen is when your program runs, your program's going to test itself 3 times. It's going to say, okay, if the user passes in 2000 for user num, and then the user passes in 2 for x, is this the output you get? It's going to be right for you the first time because you hard-coded those values. But when the program tests itself again, and it says, okay, this time I'm going to run your program, but I'm going to pass in 100 for user num and then 4 for x, this is your output. It needs to match what it's expecting to happen for the numbers that it passes in. So it's going to do that 3 times. So that's the value of making sure that your programs are variable based. That's how you do challenge activity 2.12. I am so proud of you for making it this far. I apologize that this video was long, but I promise you, this information I'm giving you is helpful. If for some reason you get this and you don't need these long videos, good for you. However, for the rest of you who need them, don't worry about them. It's week 2. We're going to figure this out, and by the time we get to week 11, you're going to be an expert. Take care.